Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Max Wolf, and I'm the Public Policy Manager at the Charles River Regional Chamber. Today, we're happy to bring to you a conversation with two candidates running for the 11th Middlesex District. The seat is currently held by State Representative Kay Kahn, who is retiring at the end of the year. The candidates you will hear from today will be on the ballot for the November 5th general election. First, we have the Democratic candidate, Amy Sangiolo, a former Newton City Councilor, and she is currently a supervising consumer specialist at the AG's office. We also have Republican candidate Vlad Yanovsky, a U.S. Army veteran who has worked in the realms of business, healthcare, and education. As for the parameters, this will be a 1-hour debate. There will be no opening statement, but each candidate will have around 90 seconds for a closing statement. Other than the closing statement, we will not be using a timer, but I asked that each candidate be respectful of each other's time and keep your answers concise and focus on the questions asked. I do reserve the right to interrupt you and probably will do in the interest of time. Finally, I did let the candidates know the last question of today's debate, which will be if you could time travel to any one day in world history, just to observe, but not to change anything, which day would you choose? Okay, and with that, we will start. Amy, your campaign has been from the progressive perspective, and Vlad, yours is from a conservative one. How have your life experiences shaped your current ideas of the role of government? And let's start with Vlad.
Thank you so much. I truly appreciate being at this forum and express my viewpoints and to talk about Amy's viewpoints. So nice, lively, healthy, friendly discussion. My involvement, for example, with the government was by my association with the military and how the government in its glory worked over there. And of course, working with the government agencies in private sector, managing and this intertwined web of working with government compliance, with government rules and regulations, working with various government agencies, see how they operate. So all of this shaped my viewpoint of your basic freedom of your basic understanding of freedom of running business and contributing to the economy. And I understood and I understand how both are necessary, but one needs to be more limited in order for the economy to flourish. So this is my perspective. Whether it's private business or government work, like I said, both are necessary, but government needs to have a lot more limiting factors in it. Otherwise, it becomes too pervasive. And since government doesn't truly contribute anything to the growth of the economy under any circumstances, except limiting private enterprise from generating more revenue and employment opportunities for others, I think that particular segment of our existence needs to be curtailed and private enterprise needs to be expanded. Not the kind of private enterprise like we have right now with things like Amazon's and other big tech and so on and so forth. Those organizations that have become pseudo-government entities, even though they're private enterprises that have to answer to shareholders. So in this particular case, business does need to be also curtailed and kept away from government entities so they don't exert undue influence like we have seen in previous elections, for example, and currently right now through, if you type in certain questions into ChatGPT, for example, you will get specific answers driven by political ideology. So complete separation of business and government entities. President Eisenhower, upon leaving, warned us about the government industrial complex. He didn't know about big tech at the time, but just get rid of big tech and so on and so forth, and you will see what he was talking about. So I'm with that mindset. Well, that's my answer to your question. Hope I answered it.
Thank you, Vlad. And Amy, how have your life experiences shaped your current ideas of the role of government?
So I think I've always been an advocate. My father was first generation Chinese American. born in a laundromat in New Jersey, and my mother is a Japanese immigrant, right? So I've always had the role of advocate to help support them, to advocate for them. My mother had limited English ability. I feel that that really shaped my experiences and my belief in what government should do. And I believe government should be there to provide, to protect, and to support and uplift the residents of the United States, right? And for people who come to the United States. I think it's a very important role that that government needs to play. Again, I've always served as an advocate, not just for my parents, but also for myself. And then later in life, I became an advocate, whether it was for the environment, whether it was for immigrants, people with disabilities, and now people who are facing homelessness because of eviction or foreclosure. So I think that's what shaped my belief in what government's role is.
Okay, thank you. Amy, you are one of so many Democrats. If elected, you would join a supermajority. How are you going to have an impact when leadership sets so much of the agenda, and how will you stand out in this majority?
That's a really good question. I wonder the same thing. I think the relationships that I've been able to forge over the years, whether it was through my 20 years serving on the city council, working with Senator Cream, as well as with Ruth Balzer and Kay Khan, I think, and as well as other state legislators and representatives in the general court, I think I have that ability to be able to make an impact from day one just based on those relationships. People know where I stand. I think they respect the fact that I've been involved in the community for such a long time, and know that I have the best interest of not just the district, but also the residents of the Commonwealth.
Okay, thank you. And Vlad, there are so many or so few Republicans on Beacon Hill, which can make it hard to get much accomplished. How are you going to get stuff done despite this fact?
It's a very good question. I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to get anything done, except my primary mission will be to lift up the veil of secrecy of what happens behind closed doors on Beacon Hill. I'd like to make sure that people understand what actually happens behind those closed doors, how their money is being spent, obviously within the confines of rules and regulations, assigned, to the members of the House, but in reality, I'd like to also be a speed bump, on the way for people who are basically profligate spenders of the taxpayers' money without any regard of where that money is going and what it's being used for and who's actually paying. I'd like to return or set the course for the return of the House of Representatives on Beacon Hill to be the people's house once again. And I'd like to inform people of what actually goes on over there. Not sure what's going to happen in my first term. Once I'm in there, we'll try to figure it out. But it is going to be a difficult trek. It's not going to be an easy task to accomplish when there's basically an 80% majority Democrats and about 20% Republicans over there, and who are, kind of silent on what's happening, whether you don't hear much from them. But things like preventing various overrides and so on and so forth, and special taxes that are being applied, like they were very effective, for example, during the gasoline tax debate. So I'll join this particular movement over there.
Okay, thank you. Now let's turn to housing, which is a big issue for our businesses. Vlad, in a Jewish Community Relations Council forum this summer, you said that you oppose all housing legislation and suggested that people who cannot afford to live in Newton should look elsewhere, such as Lawrence, Methuen, or Lowell. So, what would you do to address the state's housing needs?
I'm not exactly sure what the state's housing needs exactly are. We have plenty of homes and real estate available throughout the state to support the needs of the state. Last time I checked, we actually have people leaving the Commonwealth for whatever reason, and we have a tremendous amount of real estate being built around the Boston area and other parts. We do have a homelessness problem in Massachusetts, but that's not due to the lack of housing. That's a mental health issue. So I'd like to work on that. we do need to provide for our most vulnerable segment of the population. The reason that you hear me talk about opposition to housing is I oppose the term housing in the term that is being used. We live in homes. Housing is a generic term that actually, for me, is it's like I don't even know how to describe it. Every time I hear housing, I see housing projects. We have tried that before. It doesn't work under any circumstances. We've tried many different things. The Section 8 housing. I mean, it does housing. There's no investment of the person into the community or into the home that they're living in. Nobody makes a home. Everything is a transient. So as an immigrant, we started off, living in the places we could afford to live, and we progressed upwards as we developed ourselves, and we invested ourselves into each piece of property that we had either rented or owned. So starting from the 80s, we paid for everything that we could until we were able to afford to live in Newton as a family. So people should live where they can afford to live. We cannot transplant people from one community into another and make them part of our community, if you will.
Vlad,
They're
excuse me. That might be the case, but when we ask a lot of our businesses what is the greatest issue they're dealing with, they often cite staffing. Many employers say that their employees can't afford to live close, so they live really far away, and it's hard for them to attract workers. So how would you square these two issues, and how do you think housing relates to that?
allow people to keep more of their money so they can afford to live in places closer to where they are. So overtaxation and overburdening of people we have a lot of working poor in the state. And this is my area of expertise. I work with the working poor. I help them get into jobs that pay more money. Continuing education for people is key, and expanding their horizons is also key. We were all poor at one point in time. Nobody's born with a silver spoon in their mouth, except, the very few. But the fact of the matter is, most people have to adjust and do what they need to do.
Okay. Now, Amy, you can respond, and I have another question as well. Do you have any other policies to address this housing crisis, especially workforce housing, and these issues that the employers are facing?
Sure. So I differ from Vlad. I believe that, well, one, I believe housing is a human right. I believe that there is a shortage of housing, not just in the greater Boston area, within the Commonwealth, throughout the Commonwealth, and certainly throughout the United States, right? We need to increase supply of housing at all income levels. But in particular, my focus has always been about being more intentional about the deeply affordable housing needs that are out there, as well as middle income and workforce housing. So how can we get there? I think the housing bond bill that became law, right, was great. That's a great start, putting in money to help preserve the current supply of affordable housing and upgrade them, as well as putting in more money so that we can jumpstart and create more housing units throughout the Commonwealth. I think that what was unfortunate is that we didn't have the ability or the option for that real estate transfer fee. I think it would have given communities an opportunity. They didn't have to opt into it, but at least the opportunity to decide for themselves if they wanted to impose a real estate transfer tax so that they could create more affordable housing. I think that that's what's really important, to have sort of a wide spectrum of different types of housing units, whether they're high-end luxury market rate, but more intentional about creating the deeply affordable 3-bedroom mixed income units that I think we need throughout the Commonwealth. And that would help certainly with getting the workforce that's needed for our businesses.
Thank you. Vlad, do you have a response?
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to figure out exactly who's going to be paying for it all. This is just charging people money to sell their hard-earned dollars, sell their property. This is insanity. This would be in the city like Newton. It would average to about another $50,000 for a sale of an average home in Newton. That's a crazy amount of money to pay for a person trying to sell their home. These are people who are living on fixed income too. Not everybody in Newton is super wealthy. People rely on that money to move someplace else, for example, and use that money for living expenses. When we talk about, I also want to know what workforce housing exactly is. Back where I come from, they call that barracks. Okay, so I'm not exactly sure what we call work for housing. We talk about this in these, strange terms, but what is the truth behind it? Again, I keep saying I come from the Soviet Union. We had this. It wasn't pretty.
Okay. I would like to say that for our employers in Newton, it's about reasonable places for their employees to live so they can commute and keep their businesses open at a reasonable hour. That's often what they
How
cite.
about we just let them pay less for gas too? There's plenty of places for people to live. Framingham is plenty affordable. Natick is plenty affordable. And it's not that far away. And, people can get here. I don't think it's an issue.
And Amy, do you have a response about the real estate transfer tax or anything else?
No, again, the idea behind it was to have that option for communities to decide for themselves whether or not that was something that they wanted to opt into. I'm a strong supporter of that. I'm disappointed that that didn't go through, but hopefully, if I'm in the legislature, we can continue that conversation. Again, it's a conversation that I think needs to be had. In terms of what Vlad was saying with workforce housing, I mean, it's very clear that we don't have enough supply for folks to be able to live here in Newton that is affordable, right? For what we're paying our workers and having the housing supply that's needed, so that we can staff our businesses with folks so that they don't have to commute or have long commutes, take different trains and buses in order to get to our businesses here in Newton.
Okay, thank you. Now moving on. Amy, in the past, you have voiced your issue with 40B. 40B is a law that allows developers to sidestep local zoning in exchange for building affordable units. Specifically, you have pointed out the fact that all housing in the 40B developments is counted as affordable when measuring our subsidized housing inventory, even though only a small percentage is truly affordable. Would you support correcting this to only count truly affordable units towards that housing stock?
I think it definitely needs to be looked at because I understand the reasoning why, because we want to make sure, at least for communities that feel overburdened by development, that they're not overburdened by development. So I understand why that compromise may have been put into the legislation. Certainly, I would take a look at it. Again, I think what we should do if we're going to take a look at 40B is possibly raise the percentage of how many units should be affordable in the development, right? Right now, I think it's 20 to 25%. I would be supportive of raising that to 30, 35%.
But would you be supportive of correcting the way they count it?
Sure, but again, we have to also take a look at, what that impact is going to be, right?
Okay. In the past, you were against raising the safe harbor threshold from 10%, which is another aspect of 40B. Both of these aspects, counting and raising the safe harbor threshold, really accomplish the same thing, more 40B development, because it will open up more communities to these options. How do you square these two ideas?
I don't understand how they're not squared. I mean, if you're talking about increasing the amount of affordable housing units, I'm all for that, right? Whether you're going to do it by changing the existing law, maybe we have to look at the entire law to see whether or not it should continue to be. I mean, look, I think it's a sham because we do count them all, but at the same time, we have other measures to increase our supply of affordable housing. We just created the MBTA Communities Act, right? So that we could rezone and have transit-oriented development. I have my own issues with that law as well. But we also have the inclusionary zoning ordinance, which is at 17% here in Newton, and I certainly support increasing that percentage as well.
Thank you. Vlad, do you think Beacon Hill has gone too far with these attempts to stem the housing crisis? Whether it be 40B or another similar law, what would you do?
Beacon Hill has no business regulating housing or homes and so on and so forth. I'm all for local zoning boards making local decisions for local communities. I don't think government has any place regulating who lives where. This is a business of an individual or a family, and a local community. So Beacon Hill has no business. I would work totally against that.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just add something?
Yeah,
So, so, so Vlad, I guess from my perspective, it's not Beacon Hill telling people where to live. Beacon Hill is trying to insert itself, or the state is trying to insert itself where communities are having a hard time wrestling with or complying with getting enough affordable housing units in their communities, right? And
Well,
so sometimes local control can be overburdensome. I'm all for special permits. I was on the city council and I loved our special permit process, but I can see why people feel that it's too lengthy a process, why it can be burdensome. I understand that, and I think reforms are definitely needed. Again, I have my own issues with 40B because I think sometimes it can be a real bear on a community or certain areas of our community. Take Newtonville, for example, and see the number of 40Bs that are going up there, in that particular area. But at the same time, it's the only game in town that is creating actual affordable, a decent number of affordable housing units, and it's still not enough, right? So I think that's why the state is looking at all different tools to work with, and again, I would work with communities, not just the state coming in and telling communities what to do, but working with communities to see whether or not we can be a real partner to help create the housing that we need. Sorry.
okay, Vlad, a quick response, then we need to move on.
central planning doesn't work. It never has. It never will. It's an utter disgraceful failure every time it's been tried. Massachusetts on Capitol Hill, state politics have nothing to do with or should have nothing to do with local zoning. And once again, I'm completely and totally opposed to that.
Okay, thank you. Now let's turn to the ballot questions that are for debate this season. Question 2 aims to get rid of the MCAS as a graduation requirement. Would you support such a policy? And let's start with Vlad.
Well, it's one of the metrics by which we measure academic performance in high school, but I personally don't think it's necessary. I don't think it's required to pass and graduate high school. So yeah, I'm not necessarily in favor of the AMCAS.
Okay. Now let's turn to Amy. Same question.
No, I don't support getting rid of the graduation requirement. I think it's a way to measure performance in different school districts. It's a metric by which the state can go and help provide the funding that's needed to certain communities that are not performing well or who are underperforming. I think the problem, if we get rid of it as a graduation requirement, we'll have 351 different uh, requirements that won't be standardized, right? I think one thing that we've seen with MCAS, and again, I'm not a big proponent of standardized tests. I don't do well on standardized tests. I don't believe in teaching to the test either, but I think there should be some standardized way to measure the performance and success of our students, and where they're not succeeding, be able to give the resources needed to those districts in order to help uplift the students so that we have great performing students in a workforce that our businesses here in Massachusetts as well as around the country can rely upon.
May I?
Yeah, go ahead.
School competition is key. Introducing competition into public schooling and public education is key, whether it's charter schools or school choice. This is what's going to uplift communities and not AMCAS. I'm in this business for a very long time at this point in time, and I see the failures of our school system, and I hope to work to change all that. But the fact of the matter is, just teaching to the AMCAS, which is basically what students are doing, or teachers are doing in classes, is no way to conduct an education. Competition, building healthy competition and holding our schools accountable to produce a better student graduate.
Amy, do you have something to say about
Yeah,
competition?
so I agree with you, Vlad, in terms of not teaching to the test. And I think if school districts are doing that, that is absolutely not a good thing. I do believe that we need, a great education system, a well-rounded education, but I think there should be certain standard stuff that kids by 10th grade or, by graduation will have. And right now it's a 10th grade, requirement. So I don't think that that's a bad thing to have. If there's another alternative assessment that can come, that can be arranged or approved, I would certainly welcome that. Again, I'm not a big fan of standardized tests, but right now there is no alternative.
Okay, thank you. And now let's move on to the tip wage. Question 5 would require restaurants to pay their wait staff minimum wage on top of tips. This gradual increase would take place over the next 5 years. Do you support this ballot question? And let's start with Amy.
So yes, I do support the ballot question. I understand that it can be burdensome for our businesses, particularly our restaurants and other businesses that have uh, wage earners. The problem that I see is based on my experience working at the Attorney General's office. I know that our Fair Labor Division has a number of wage theft complaints that have come in. And I think that we owe it to our earners, particularly our tip wage earners. They are usually folks that are at the lower earning spectrum, and I think we owe it to them to ensure that they get at least the minimum wage.
Thank you. And Vlad?
So at the same time, we're trying to fight for the minimum wage. We're also beginning to tax their tips, which is one way that these folks make or tend to make more money for a good service that they provide. No, I don't support minimum wage for anything. Minimum wage is a discriminatory practice which discriminates against kids who are trying to get ahead in life and get a job and work their way up. And they certainly discriminates against other strata of the population who are trying to get into this. Nobody's looking to be a food service employee or a wait staff member for the rest of their lives. This is craziness. What it's going to do is going to destroy businesses, destroy restaurants, and it's going to destroy anyone's ability to go out and eat in a restaurant because the prices on food and service are going to be exorbitant, which they already are. So too few people are going out to eat at this point in time. This is just going to kill the business. So no, I do not support this ballot question. And again, like I said, the minimum wage laws are discriminatory. I would not practice them.
Does that mean in a hypothetical universe that you would vote to repeal the Massachusetts minimum wage?
Absolutely.
Okay. Amy, do you have a response to that?
So I disagree. I would not get rid of the minimum wage.
Okay. Let's move on to the next ballot question. Question 1. Approval ratings for Beacon Hill are under 50%. Their recent failure to pass the economic development bill is just one example of the frustrations that the business community has with them, especially with the lack of transparency that surrounded that decision. Right now, ballot question 1 would allow the state auditor to audit the legislature. Do you support this question? And let's start with Amy.
So I signed the petition to get it on the ballot. I think it'd be interesting to see how it would work. I have heard arguments that it would be difficult for all the things that the auditor would like to be able to audit to be able to do because of the separation of powers and between the different constitutional offices. So I welcome the opportunity to take a look at that. But I do believe that, we should have transparency in government. Again, I don't know how that would work. I suspect that it will win overwhelmingly, just because of the frustration that people have right now and not understanding how government work currently works.
So if you were elected, would you still support that position? Because almost every state legislator has come out against it and come out against the idea of auditing the legislature. Even if it made you unpopular with your colleagues, would you still support such a plan?
Again, yes, I would support having an audit, but again, I don't know how that works, right? Um, I'm not there. I don't know what the intent of the auditor in terms of how what's going to be legal or not to be able to audit will work. So that's where.
Thank you. And Vlad, would you support question 1?
I think on this issue, I think Amy and I have a very similar outlook. Yes, an audit is important. As a business, I'm audited every year. And the state legislature should be as well. But once again, just like as Amy pointed out, there's not enough detail or understanding of the rules as to how this is done. Yes, in general, I do support the idea, and I will certainly vote for things which will make me definitely unpopular with the rest of the folks on Beacon Hill. So my commitment is I will do things which are uncomfortable, and I will do things which are a disruption. If an audit is necessary, it should be done.
Thank you. Now let's move on to transportation, a big issue for our businesses. Kate Kahn famously advocated for funding and rebuilding Newton's commuter rail stations. How would you approach advocating and working towards a solution to the lack of funding for the station's redesign? And let's start with Vlad.
Well, whether it's the MBTA or the commuter rail, it has been a failure any which way you slice it. We need to start with the complete and total reworking of how these operations are running, because every election cycle we have a conversation about the MPTA or the commuter rail, and still our train stations are not in compliance with the ADA rules and regulation. How is that possible that a semi-state run organization is not in compliance with laws that are on the books already, and with basically budgets which are swollen with money, and every year it's not enough? So it's a failed operation. It needs to be revamped or somehow privatized. I'm not sure exactly how yet, but there's a big problem there, and it's not providing a service to the people who are using it, and it's really not that affordable. The commuter rail is fairly expensive for people to get to. If you live somewhere by Lowell or Lawrence, and you're trying to get on the commuter rail, it's costing you about $400 a month. That is a large sum of money for something that works sporadically and doesn't provide the service that it needs to do.
I would like to say that the commuter rail is partially privatized right now, but how would you approach funding the stations? It's a huge issue for businesses in those areas, Newtonville included. How can we work with the federal government to help fund these stations redesigns?
If it were possible to have more community involvement and for people who support the enterprise to help improve the infrastructure by private donations, if that were a possibility, I think that would be a better way to go, because that would also provide people agency in how these operations are run in their communities. So instead of general taxation of everybody who's willing or not willing, I think community engagement and community funding may be one of the ways to do that, where people would actually have oversight of the money that's being spent on stations and so on and so forth. That way people would have a lot more to say and have a direct control over the funds. I don't think these people should be trusted with people's money. I'm sorry. Year in and year out, they waste so much. It's incredible.
Thank you. And Amy, how would you approach funding these stations redesign?
So again, it's a real conundrum, right? I mean, KCON has been at it for what, 25 of her 30 years that she's been on the at the State House trying to get these commuter rail stations upgraded and made accessible. So yes, I believe in working with Jake Auchincloss, Congressman Auchincloss, to put pressure on the federal government to go and kick in the funds that have been promised to the residents of Newton for many, many years to get these stations upgraded. As Vlad pointed out, they are inaccessible. They are in violation of ADA regulations. Absolutely. One thing that we did as a community, we went through a very divisive rezoning of our to comply with the MBTA communities law, and the state now needs to hold up its bargain to make sure that they provide accessible, reliable transportation and frequent transportation to these residents in exchange for the density that we've approved. So I put pressure not only on the federal government, but also on the state government. Look, one thing that did not happen in this particular term was that I believe that there was a promise to put at least the Newtonville commuter rail station in the transportation CIP, and it was not there, right? So again, the more pressure that we can put on our state and federal government to fund these stations, the better. So I'll be there to advocate and fight for it. I'm really ticked off about that.
Thank you. Vlad, you were talking about reworking the MBTA, and there will be an opportunity to do that this year. The MBTA is facing a fiscal cliff in the next year, and will eventually have to cut service and be a lot worse than it is now if Beacon Hill does not intervene. How would you attempt to tackle this issue, and what revenue stream changes would you consider for the T? And let's start with Vlad.
To be honest with you, I don't know. I really don't know as to how to tackle this problem in particular. It is, as Amy just said, it is a conundrum and is a black hole. The MBTA is always on the precipice of some kind of a collapse, and we're always under threat of cutting services. Why? I don't know. But I would love to investigate further how they are operating, how much money they're spending, where the money is going, and what we as lawmakers can do on Beacon Hill to actually force the proper management of this organization and make it comply with the budgets and make things work on the amount of money that they've been getting so far. Because each time we increase the revenues going to the MBTA, and each time it's a failure. But my answer to you, truly, I have no idea. For me to even speculate at this point in time would be, I don't know, disingenuous at best.
Amy, now some people say that in the last 2 years, the MBTA has been under the best leadership it's been in a while. However, this fiscal cliff still remains. What revenue streams would you consider for the T in order to help it back together?
Sure. Thank you for mentioning that. Hillary has done a tremendous job, and I think we've already seen improvements. I mean, yes, there have been delays, and there have been many repairs and closures in order to upgrade our systems, but I think we've seen a market improvement in terms of the service that the T is providing. I think there are a couple of ways that we could increase our investments into public transit. Um, First off, we've got the Fair Share Amendment, right? The Fair Share Amendment does provide that the monies raised can go to public education as well as public transit. So I think we have those funds that are available. I think we can look at our excise taxes, our registration fees. We can look at a gas tax. We can look at congestion pricing. We can look at tolls. We can look at development impact fees, right? Particularly for those development projects that are near public transit. So I think those are ways to get some funds, much needed funds to invest in our rest of our system. One thing I definitely do think that we do need to do, I mean, we're going to need to electrify our system, right? We're going to need to make sure because transportation sector is one of the biggest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions. We're going to have to again, make our service much more reliable. We're going to have to make it more frequent if we're going to meet our climate action goals because we want people to get out of their single use occupancy vehicles and get onto public transit. And in order to do that, we have to make them more frequent, more reliable, and extremely accessible. So we have to look at those ways. Sorry.
That's okay. Vlad, you had a quick response?
Yeah, everything Amy just rattled off, all these things that she wants us to be taxed at. Sorry, Amy, I didn't mean to come across as rude, but everything you mentioned means more money coming out of a working poor's pocket. We're going to make them destitute if we do that. And if we try to electrify our grid any further, we would need to install all new grid. We don't have that capacity in our grid to electrify anything any further. And, you know, that just means that we're burning fossil fuels someplace else. That doesn't take us off of fossil fuels just because we electrify here. We're burning coal someplace else, not too far away.
Thank you. Now let's move on to immigration. There's a sizable workforce of immigrants that remain untapped within Massachusetts. Whether they need English training, transportation, or even the ability to transfer foreign accreditations more easily, how can Beacon Hill help tap into this resource for employers? Let's start with Amy.
So that's a great question. I was just reading an article this morning. I think it was in the Boston Globe, talking about how I think 41 migrants have been placed in much needed positions in the healthcare industry. So I think what we need to do is try to help in terms of the wraparound services that we provide. make sure that we could fast track the educational programs that they can get into, as well as work authorizations in order to get folks into the job market, and the ability to start filling in the much needed staffing positions that are available, and many folks are not filling.
Thank you. And Vlad?
I just wanted to sort of ask for a little clarification here before I answer my question. Are we talking about people who come here without proper immigration screening and so on and so forth? Are we talking about migrants, or are we talking about legal immigrants?
We could be talking about people who have recently claimed asylum from Haiti. We can talk about people who've been asylum from other countries, or people who have immigrated just generally.
Okay, so if we're talking about asylum seekers, we're talking about people who did things legally and they filed their asylum paperwork correctly. That means that they received their work permits rather expeditiously, and most of them, believe it or not, land in my gentle hands. In the enterprise that I've been running for the last 25 years, I train and retrain healthcare personnel on a daily basis, and I work with partners who distribute funds from the state to help these folks get reacclimated to the new business environment, work environment, and so on and so forth. So as far as legal immigrants are concerned, yes, I'm all for that. However, various state agencies do stand in the way. Like, for example, I know KCON has been working for years to make, for example, nursing compact a real thing in Massachusetts, and to no avail, as the Board of Nursing in Massachusetts, a state agency, is standing in the way of doing it. There is no fluidity. There's no dynamic movement of people coming from other states to work in Massachusetts. Massachusetts is a highly exclusionary place where we cannot tap the resources of people in nearby states, which are actually providing an easy pathway for people to get into the workforce, especially into healthcare, which is Massachusetts' economic engine. We have more people working in healthcare than anything else. So yeah, I would like to be able to work on streamlining as much as possible. And actually, it would help to get the government right out of this business and allow the industry to take care of this. But yes, our boards are highly exclusionary, and they make life very difficult for people, especially from Haiti. If you go to our nursing homes, you will find that probably 80% of all the certified nursing assistants working there are Haitian men and women. What would we do without them? So, and those people who worked in this back-breaking labor are trying to move forward, and they can't because their credentials are being delayed or detained or postponed, and so on and so forth. It's a problem.
Amy, do you have a response, or should we move on?
No, I was just a question to Vlad, just a clarification. Sorry, because I sort of lost it in your discussion. So you're talking about making it easier for licensing requirements. Is that
Yes,
what you're talking about? Okay.
absolutely. Not easier, just streamlined, you know, and especially for people who come from different states, they were able to get credentialed over there, but they can't work here.
Okay.
Now,
And I would agree.
I'm all for state rights, but Massachusetts makes it impossible for people to move from other states to Massachusetts, where they can actually make more money if they were able to get licensed.
Yeah,
There's
and
like we have a nursing shortage, but we can't allow nurses from other states to come and work here.
And Amy?
I would just, yeah, I would agree that we have to take a look at our licensing requirements, and streamlining is great, but we want to make sure that they meet our standards. That's all.
Thank you. Next question. This recent slate of ballot questions will have serious consequences on our state's economy and have summoned a lot of out-of-state funding. Do you think the state ballot process should be reformed? And let's start with Vlad on this one.
I think we have a fairly decent ballot process. Let's just stick to what works. I don't see any issues here.
Amy?
I don't understand the question. Can you repeat it?
Yes. The recent slate of ballot questions will have serious impacts on our economy, and a lot of them have been funded by out-of-state funding, not from Massachusetts. Do you think the ballot process should be reformed?
Oh, I see. Oh, so the issue is whether we should allow all of these out-of-state organizations to go and really push these measures onto
Yes.
us without. So I think it's certainly something that we should take a look at. But I can't imagine that there's not enough support here in the state for many of these ballot initiatives as well. For them to have been able to collect the signatures to get them on the ballot and for it to pass muster with the Attorney General's office, right? So yes, we could take a look at how much of out-of-state influence is coming in, definitely.
Thank you. And now we will move to our closing question. If you could time travel to any one day in world history, just to observe, but not to change anything, which day would you choose? And let's start with Amy.
So I don't have the exact date, but it was when our founding fathers were considering the Electoral College. I would love to be a fly on the wall to listen to that debate.
Thank you. And what would you hope to get out of that?
A better understanding of why we're at the point in time that we're at now. That's all. I want to understand their reasoning because I don't.
Well, I can
Thank
answer
you.
that question for you, Amy. It's to prevent mob rule.
And so, Amy, would you support eliminating the Electoral College?
Yes.
Okay. Vlad,
Not me.
I don't know if you
Um,
respond to that or answer your question
no,
about
no, no,
which
no.
day
I'm
you're
good.
choosing.
I'll answer my question. I was just having a little fun with Amy. I would like to go back to June 10th, 1988. That's the day I met my wife. I'd like to just go back and look at that blessed event one more time. There's really all other events in human history don't really concern me as much as that one. But I would like to go back to that and just, as a fly on the wall, as Amy said, just to sort of look at it again from a slightly different angle. And that would be my choice.
Thank you. And so we're going to be able to end a little bit early, but first, closing statements, and we'll start with Amy real soon. Why should voters vote for you in this upcoming election? You have
Sure.
90
Well,
seconds.
thank you so much for the opportunity to meet with you all and your members. Vlad, it's always great to have an opportunity to discuss our different viewpoints. So I'm Amy Sangiolo. I am a former city councilor and I currently, as you said in the beginning, work at the Attorney General's office in housing. I believe that we are facing some critical challenges right now in our Commonwealth and in our country. We have a climate crisis. We've got an affordable housing shortage. We have underfunding of our transit systems and our education systems. We've got healthcare costs that are rising just incredibly. And we have a tax on our rights. I believe that we need someone who's ready to lead and succeed on day one. And I believe that I can fill that based on the experiences that I've had and the beliefs that I have in terms of where we should go, not only in this district, but also in the state. So I've got deep legislative experience in getting things done on the city council. I served for 20 years. I was vice chair for 2 terms, and I led on preserving open space, protecting our trees, and getting more affordable housing units in developments, and also fought to get more funding for our schools. I have proven success in delivering constituent service and a commitment to transparency and good communication. So I ask for your support and your vote.
Thank you, Amy. Vlad?
Thank you so much. And once again, I want to thank the forum and I want to thank Amy for being here today. It's always great to talk to you and to disagree friendly with what we're trying to accomplish here. People should vote for me because I'm a complete and total outsider to this particular process. I am not a career politician and I don't intend to be one. My entire desire to go to the State House, to Beacon Hill, is to stop the overtaxation and overburdening reach of the government into the private sector. I'm not saying get rid of the government. No, government role is necessary for oversight and to make sure that people are properly taken care of, but yet free to do what they want to do and to keep more of their money. This is why I want to go in. I also want to make sure that Newton stays Newton and doesn't turn into Everett or Somerville, or where the population density is so high that every person is living one on top of the other. I want to keep Newton Newton. I'd like to prevent the migrant crisis. That is an existential crisis to Massachusetts, not the environmental crisis that people talking about. It's the safety, it's the health and the overburdening of our systems. I'm a legal immigrant. I've been living in this country for 46 years. I've served in the military. I was a first responder. I'm a highly trained healthcare professional. I'm an inventor. I'm an engineer. I've done it all. I want to bring that feeling of rugged individualism and independence to Beacon Hill. I want people to be raised up, but by their own speed. Government can't do that. This is my reasoning for going. I want to make sure that everybody's rights under the Constitution, whether it's Massachusetts or federal Constitution, US Constitution, are protected. That's everybody. Everybody who is allowed to be here, that is.
Thank you. And that was our last question and our last statement. So thank you everyone for joining us, and thank you to the candidates so much for coming here. We will send out a recording of this debate to all the people who have registered, and we hope that you leave more informed for your vote on November 5th. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.